Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, a place where we demystify complex technologies every day and provide real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping entire industries. But we do all this in a language that everyone can understand. Now, I recently came across the Talend Data Health Barometer, and one of the highlights of this report was that 97% of the respondents faced challenges in using data. Does that surprise you? I suspect not. So today, I want to talk about the complex regulatory landscape around data, the evolution of it, and how organisations can navigate through it and find their way through all that Gdpr and data privacy quagmire, and also explore examples of regulation and the idea of data residency and how companies should be handling data. And I've found the perfect guest. He's the CISO at Talend, and his name is Nick Vigier. So buckle up and hold on tight, because wherever you're listening in the world, it's time for me to beam your ears all the way to New York City, where Nick is waiting to share his story. So, a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Nick Vigier, I'm the CISO at Talend. I've been in the security industry for about 22 years now. So, as the CISO at Talend, responsible for product security, our platform security, our enterprise security, and making sure that we're managing everything from a governance perspective as well, and all the fun compliance things. But historically, so been in the security field for about 22 years, started in network engineering for the New York Stock Exchange. 4 months in, September 11th happened, which is a really interesting business continuity event for a network engineer. And the way I got into security was there were no seats next to the network engineering team. So I sat next to the penetration testing team. And I thought what they were doing was really interesting. And a mentor of mine saw my interest, fostered the interest. I volunteered my time with the pen testing team. And after a few years, they eventually brought me in when they had a slot opened. Realized very quickly that penetration testing is an art and I'm not an artist. So broadened my perspective on security by joining that mentor at another company where we then covered everything security. So physical security, bug sweeping, all of the security and risk management elements, the security operations, enterprise security, everything you could imagine under the sun that would fit into a security umbrella, which was extremely eye-opening. And since then, I've gone to a number of different organizations. I was at Sony, I was at Palantir, DigitalOcean. I was a CIO at Gemini, which is a cryptocurrency exchange. And then I've done the consulting thing. And I was a CISO at ID.me, which is an identity verification platform in the United States. And now at Talend. So I've had a tour of a variety of different industries. Being a CIO was an interesting shift. Realize that, security is really the thing that I love doing.
Love that. And I must admit, you've set off my tech spidey senses here when you said you're the CISO at Talend, because I did speak with Talend's former CISO, Anne Hardy, last year. Is she still there, or has she moved on to something else now?
No, she had moved on back in about December. So I started at Talend in April of this year.
Awesome. And for anyone listening that are just hearing about Talend for the first time, can you just remind the listeners of what it is and the kind of problems you're helping businesses with?
I mean, I think, Talend in general is in the data industry, right?
Yeah.
So our goal is really, helping organizations achieve that organization-wide data health, and understanding where your data is, what it is, whether or not it's good data, and then getting it to where it needs to be. So our data management platforms basically are used to kind of close some of that skills gap, right? I think to date, data is this thing that everyone wants to have their arms around, but no one really has their arms around it. And then you have your data scientists that are super specialized and understand the data intimately, but the people that need to be able to use the data and understand the data might not have that visibility. So Talend's tools and products are really around making sure that that data is more accessible, that the data is reliable, that organizations have the information that they need in order to make the informed decisions with the data that they have. For me personally, from a mission perspective, I think it's really important. Security and data fit together in a number of different ways. I think there are huge opportunities to bring Talend's products to bear actually on the cybersecurity problem itself. So beyond just the compliance elements, but security is all about bringing data together, telling the story about the data, finding the interesting bits of information in the data, and then turning that into actionable intelligence. And so for me, like, this is a very interesting intersection between product and mission for me from a security perspective.
I love that. And one of the big reasons I invited you on the podcast today was I also saw recently that you've released the Talend Data Health Barometer. So can you share any highlights or standout stats from that report?
I think the biggest thing, and I think I touched on it briefly just a second ago, but putting a number on it's even more eye-opening. We've got 97% of respondents saying that they face challenges in using the data. Yeah. We're all swimming in data, right? There's this, human desire to find meaning, right? And to be able to tell a story and to make data-driven decisions. But fundamentally, we're all swimming in it and just trying to find our way. So, with that, then also comes all the compliance and security issues, right? If you don't know what you have, you can't secure it. Yeah. And so that's a challenge, like the security and compliance is a challenge. I think we saw for 37 respondents. And then if you talk about it just within the UK, now you're at 42%, right? So that need for compliance and the need for security around data is growing, but it's still a huge challenge for folks to wrap their arms around. I don't think it's groundbreaking, but I think it's bringing to the surface and bringing to the forefront with data that we have a data problem as a, in the online universe, and how organizations are managing it.
And I suspect there's organizations or business leaders listening all over the world thinking, at last, it's not just me that's going through all that. I think it's in some ways words of comfort. But just to set the scene for today's conversation, can you tell me more about right now? We're in the middle of this complex regulatory landscape, and how do you see it evolving? Because I think it's something like 4 years since GDPR arrived, isn't it?
I know it's this. You've got the data wranglers that are collecting all the data. You've got the people about whom the data is talking about, and then you've got different governments and cultures that want to impose different ways of being with the data, right? And whether it's that element, that illusion of control or governance, or whether it is effective control and governance, become this really interesting, hodgepodge. So obviously we kicked all of this off with GDPR in Europe, and we've had overturning of things like Safe Harbor and Privacy Shield. And, it's been this like nonstop back and forth volleying around what it means to, have ensured data privacy for your citizens. We've seen California, in the United States, California's been at the forefront of this for several years, and, in fact, modeling off of GDPR and then enhancing it, taking it further. I think we're still feeling it out. I mean, I honestly, just from a United States perspective, every state's doing something different. I think is almost been done in a way to challenge the federal government to come up with a unified approach. But I know even I was at Sony in 2013, and just managing the privacy regulations at that time, that was pre-GDPR, it was still a nightmare. Different states think that different elements are PII, for example, or what becomes a reportable event, what types of data, what quantities. I would love to see something global come out that sets a standard for privacy and for how organizations treat data. But I think we're still in this like primordial ooze phase of privacy regulations and how to manage the landscape. Fundamentally, it's all about just trying to stay up to speed on all the different regulations. Like, you have to keep your pulse on it. You have to understand how it's impacting your business, and you have to be able to judge the risk of enforcement. some organizations will throw caution to the wind and say, we'll just pay the fines if they show up. It's a business risk decision. But I think most organizations are trying to take this as seriously as they possibly can, and in as cautious and risk averse way as they possibly can, in order to, do what's right for the organization, the shareholders, and the customers. So we have a lot of work to do. And harmonization is hard across cultures, as we've learned with, through decades with the UN and things like that, like people coming to an agreement on things as ephemeral and ethereal as identity and privacy. We still have decades of work to do to get this thing where it needs to be.
And it's funny you should say that, because 4 years after GDPR arrived, there are still some sites in the US that just simply can't be bothered with serving European audiences and go, it's too much hassle. Sorry, we're not actually providing you with any information. So, I mean, how can businesses better find their way through this GDPR and data privacy quagmire? Because we're seeing more and more things like this arrive. It's not going anywhere, is it?
No, it's not going away.
Yeah,
but it will. The only guarantee is it will continue to change. It'll continue to evolve. So, I mean, I think the biggest thing is, number one, is just staying on top of the legal developments and understanding how regulators are using these regulations from an enforcement perspective. And just making sure that you're ready. Right. I think when CCPA came into effect in California, for example, it was on January 1st at 12:01 a.m. goes into effect. And you had a lot of these law firms that were essentially just lining up California residents to file class action lawsuits against any company doing business in California in an attempt to essentially perform a denial of service attack against, companies and demanding that they provide information about what data you have about a given person, et cetera. So you have this weaponization of regulation to a certain extent by certain parties. But the guarantee is that you're always going to have a shift in the regulations themselves, a shift in a constant evolution in enforcement appetite and severity. And fundamentally, as a business, and I think this is kind of what plays into Talend's hands to a certain extent because of the products that we have, is knowing what data you have, where it's going, who has access to it, and what you're doing with it. And I think that's a lot of, having that information, data about your data, becomes really key in being able to understand your exposure and the risks that you have in a landscape that's constantly changing. The last bit of advice I would give is just having the right advisors, right, and the right means of keeping track of this. I think thinking that you're going to keep track of it yourself on a global basis is certainly challenging with the localization of a lot of these regulations. So I think having a strong bench of outside privacy counsel and advisors to help understand if you're impacted or how you're impacted becomes a key as well.
And we are in an incredibly strange place right now, and there's a great deal of uncertainty and, dare I say, global conflict. But also, many are embracing the life of a digital nomad and having the ability to work from anywhere. And even my son's talking about working in Southeast Asia next year, and Bali is incredibly attractive if all you need is a Wi-Fi connection. But can you share any examples of regulations, especially around the idea of data residency and how companies should handle data? Because things are quickly getting quite complicated, aren't they?
Yeah, and like I said, it's every country has their own approach to this, right? You've got some countries require you to store the data locally, but only if it has certain characteristics. And like, what happens if that data is in another language, right? Like, how do you really know? So China has their PIPA law, for example, and Japan has data residency requirements, and there's all these different that hodgepodge we were just talking about. It's trying to keep track of it. I think a lot of organizations are just, here's the solution. I'll just open up a AWS region, AWS stack in the region that the customer's in, and then like I just apply a blanket rule to it and call it a day, right? But sometimes that that hammer approach doesn't necessarily work. And it all goes back to knowing what data you have and whether it fits the profile of having to have it locally within wherever it is. Most of our cloud clients, for example, they opt to have that local database, right? They want to, like, we don't want to even think about data transfer going across a border, leaving a zone, whatever it might be. And then you have to basically handle the data, in accordance with how sensitive it is, right? But all of that can only happen if you understand your data, if you know what it is. And then also having that kind of intimate knowledge of, like, what are the characteristics of the data that then trigger these different rules and regulations to be applicable. One of the things that I'm seeing more and more is kind of those data privacy engineers of, let's figure out ways of making it so that you can use the data in the way that helps the business, but also manages the privacy regulations. So, like, that understanding of that intersection between the data characteristics and their applicability to regulations in different regions becomes extremely valuable to businesses at that point to be able to leverage that information.
And I'm curious on that topic of data sovereignty. Do you think it is outdated or even possibly just the last hurdle in the life cycle of privacy policies?
I mean, I think it just brings another layer of intentionality and purpose to those regulations. I mean, data sovereignty and data residency are like two different things.
Yeah.
I don't think the data residency is outdated. Data is that, like, currency, it can be weaponized, and if you're a government actor, and would you really want your nation's currency stored do you want it in your country or someone else's country? And then the data residency side of it, from a globalization perspective and innovation, like, maybe that's not the greatest thing in the world, but it's a way of maintaining the control. On the data sovereignty side, that's not outdated either. We have global governments with populations of people that, like, either have weaker or stronger feelings about different issues. So, hence why we have GDPR, for example. Like, Europe felt really strongly after the whole Five Eyes thing and Edward Snowden that, hey, we want to make sure that, the NSA is not looking at European data. Like, their concerns shouldn't be thrown away either, right? Just because the data is placed in a different geography, like, the laws should follow the data. So it's really like, let's make sure, finding that way of operating. I think there's a lot of the ways that these things come about. There's that fear, uncertainty, and doubt aspect, the FUD, where it's really about, like, let's talk about why.
Yeah.
Right. Let's talk about not the letter of the law, but the spirit of the, like, what is the actual goal here? Because a lot of things can get codified, but if we don't understand why something is the way that it is, we can't figure out if there's a better way of doing it than what someone else already said that's how you have to do it. And I think that's where a lot of those kind of, like, data privacy engineers and things like that start coming into the picture of, and the lawyers and the outside counsel and all those things to help you understand what are we actually trying to achieve with data residency or with data sovereignty, so that you can meet the regulatory goals, the privacy appetite of those different regions and citizens, and be able to deliver. I think it's so much more, it's so nuanced in a lot of ways that it's not just as simple as, like, here's the speed limit, follow the speed limit.
And do you think there's an opportunity to refer to the establishing data excellent use case where data governance will play a central role?
I think that organizations right now are they're swimming in the data they're collecting. I think we talked about this a little bit of, like, just knowing what the data is, what you have, where it's going, what it's doing, and from that data excellence perspective, of being able to say, I know why I have the data, right? So it's one thing to just have data. It's another thing to be able to say why you have the data. And then the why fits into that, the governance, the data governance side, and being able to tell the story about how it's effective. So, I mean, security being a great example, right? You walk into an environment and de facto say, I want all the logs for everything. Okay, well, why? What story are you really trying to tell? Do you really need it all? And the first step in any security organization and investigation is around data minimization, so that you take the data that you actually need, because otherwise you'll just be swimming in it. You'll never be able to analyze it all, and you'll never make use of it. Even if just in case in the future you might potentially need something, that, data collection ad infinitum is probably a bad idea. And I think that kind of the data excellence component, I think a lot of the things that we're doing at Talend is around understanding what the data is, how it fits together, how you can use it, how to manage it effectively, how to introduce the governance around it in an effective way, in order to then answer that data governance question and to make sure that you're kind of fitting pieces of the puzzle together.
We started the podcast talking about your data health barometer. So just as we come full circle, did anything surprise you in that report, and what makes you hopeful about the future as well?
So, I think what it comes down to is that the biggest barrier to getting the value out of the data isn't really budget or technology. It's about people.
Yeah.
Right. It's getting the right data culture, getting the right understanding about the data, figuring out how it's used. Like there's a desire to democratize the way in which data is used to help make better decisions, right? Whether it's about your business strategy or how you approach a customer or what types of products you should be building. And so, building a data culture that fosters that common understanding about data, how it's used, should really be that top priority for organizations, and make sure that they can realize the operational economic promise of those data initiatives. That ROI is really the key to all of this and being able to show that value. So the first step in that is really that shared understanding about data, right? Yeah. Being able to democratize the data, being able to, make the informed decisions. But a third of companies have reservations about how well employees understand the data they work with. There's no common language about the data, and the businesses aren't really prepared to face the challenges ahead as a result of it. And I think that's where, understanding the who, what, where, when, why becomes really important in the data story. And same with the regulation side. So really what the thing that really, comes to light and makes me hopeful about the future is that companies are understanding that, like, okay, now we have the pipelines for collecting data. How do we bring in the data literacy component, right? It was something like 65% of the companies we had surveyed had started a data literacy program to improve their data understanding. That's huge, right? Like I said, even on the security side, that's my goal, right? We look at our ability to operate. It starts with knowledge management. It then goes to observability, and then you get to the automation, right? And you can't do a lot of the things that machines do well if you don't have the right data. I spent some of my time at Palantir, which is, a data analytics firm that deals with massive sets of data and performs massive amounts of data analytics to find the interesting insights into what's, going on out there. And machines do things exceedingly well if you give them the right information. And I think that data literacy is really what's going to help people democratize the data that they're collecting, maybe better target the data that they're collecting in the first place, and manage the regulations around it.
100% with you on that. And of course, also at the beginning of the podcast, we talked about your career path that you took there, the journey that you've been on. And if we look back across that, of course, none of us are able to achieve any amount of success without a little help along the way. So is that a particular person that you're grateful towards who possibly helped you get where you are today that we can give a little shout out or thank you to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are two people that really come to mind for me. One is that mentor at the beginning that brought me in the first place, the gentleman, Al Berg, who actually officiated my wedding, to give you an idea of, how strong of a mentor he was. And still is. And I think he's kind of the person that helped me understand that, number one, security is extremely broad. And I think that's what keeps bringing me back to this. The security is the only discipline within an organization that has to work across the entire company and work with the individual teams across the entire company in the way in which those individual teams do their work. Right. Mm-hmm. So in that, I learned that, so HR, human resources, works across the entire organization doing human resources things, right? Performance management, hiring and firing, and like all the things that are human resources things, but they're not really understanding like how the legal team does legal work or how the engineering team builds software or anything like that. The security organization, in the ways that I had learned from Al, was basically, you need to understand how the legal team does their work. You need to understand how the engineering team builds software. You need to understand how the IT team manages their organization laptops and the workflow. You need to understand how someone walks into a building and where they need to go in order to do the proper physical security. And so you have this like really intimate knowledge about the organization and how it operates and the efficiency of it. And I think as a security program, we have a very unique opportunity to bring people together from completely different disciplines, but who are trying to solve similar problems. So like the data problem is a great example of saying, hey, how do we bring teams together that are trying to solve similar data problems, even though they might not look the same, or they might be operating on different islands. So he really taught me about that glue, and definitely carried with me throughout my career.
I think that's a beautiful moment to end on. But before I do let you go, for anyone listening, just wanting to find out more information about anything we've talked about today, including that data health barometer, or just want to find more information or contact your team, for example, what's the best starting point for everything?
Yeah, I mean, so Talend, we have the Talend website. So talend.com/security will take you to all of our security content. We're actually in the process of revamping a bunch of this. We've got security@talend.com is a really easy way to just reach out to the security team. And then, we, from a product perspective, we have our bug bounty program through Bug Crowd. So for some reason, someone finds something within our software. No one's perfect. We do have that program available as well. So I think that the biggest thing for us is making sure that we are available to our customers and we're available to, help answer questions and help people understand how seriously Talend takes security. But it's always a work in progress and we're always trying to do better.
Well, as we said very early on in the interview there, I think every business in every industry is drowning in data, trying to make sense of it and trying to secure it, and helping businesses find a way through the GDPR and all the other regulatory requirements and the data privacy quagmire is incredibly overwhelming and daunting for many, many people out there. But I think you've simplified it in a language that everyone can understand and also provided workarounds. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on here and share your story today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Once again, we covered so much there, didn't we? From data sovereignty and GDPR, navigating the data privacy quagmire. But that stat still ringing in my ears there from that Talend Data Health Barometer report that 97% of the respondents are facing challenges in how they're using their data. So over to you on this one. I would imagine that it's that same 97% of everyone listening. What challenges are you facing? How are you overcoming them? What's working? What isn't? If you want to sit on here alongside me and talk about your challenges and your story, email me now, techblogwriter@outlook.com. If you just want to send me a quick recording that we can play on a future episode, you can just hit the audio button on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, etc. at Neil C. Hughes. And I am adding a few videos to TikTok now at Neil C. Hughes. YouTube channel, techblogwriter.co.uk. In short, I'm the easiest guy in the world to find and I love talking with you all. So don't just follow me, hit connect, send me a message and we'll keep this conversation going. But that's it for today. So a big thank you for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.